from Wyoming is now recognized for 5 minutes.
I'm sorry, but this sounds like a racket. I mean, I can just hear that. That's a nice company you have there. It'd be a tragedy if something happened to it. Wow. About 70% of publicly traded equity shares are held by institutional investors rather than individuals. ISS and Glass Lewis control at least 90% of the proxy advisor market, exerting influence over $20 trillion in investor assets. Glass Lewis is owned by 2 Canadian financial institutions and ISS by a German corporation, yet together they dictate votes for most of America's publicly traded companies. Mr. Egan, should foreign-owned businesses hold that kind of power and control over U.S. companies?
What's going on, Patriots? Welcome back to America First. If you're new here, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because we're bringing you the hard truths that the mainstream media won't tell you about what's really happening to our country. Today, we're diving into something that should absolutely infuriate every single American who cares about our economic sovereignty.
Thank you very much for the question. In our opinion, for capital markets to work properly, you need a diversity of views. Perhaps the biggest concern that exists in the market is that it is dysfunctional in the sense that the 2 dominant proxy advisory firms are not independent, that they're using the recommendations and the scores and the ratings on the consulting side to drive their proxy advisory votes. If they charge nothing for their proxy advisory services and basically using a monopoly on one area, that is with the platforms, to extend to the other area, they would be just fine. So there's relatively little competition because there's blockage, and those 4 items that I had mentioned really should be examined to keep the markets competitive.
Well, do you think that most Americans know about this foreign ownership or what these companies actually do?
I highly doubt it.
Okay, Mr. Crane, with this much control, there must be an understanding of whether proxy advice actually aligns with investor preferences as these firms grow in power and influence. In your experience in working with U.S. manufacturers, have these ideology-driven directives based in climate change policies, the DEI agenda, ESG policies, and more strengthened their competitiveness or added unnecessary costs and constraints?
Thank you for that question, Congresswoman, excuse me. I think that the key thing to remember here is that the proxy advisory firms don't have a fiduciary duty to the underlying Main Street investors who are saving for a secure retirement via these larger institutional investors. So when they're making these voting recommendations and casting investors' votes through their robo-voting services on their behalf, they have no underlying obligation to those everyday Americans, whether that's on everyday corporate governance topics or on some of the ESG matters that you've described. They have their own set of beliefs about how corporate America should be run, and they don't have any obligation to align those beliefs with the financial needs of everyday Americans saving for retirement in the public market.
Well, in listening to the testimony from the 4 of you, that is the thing that struck me the most, is that this seems to be a fundamental violation of these companies' fiduciary responsibilities to maximize profits for their shareholders. Do you agree with that, Mr. Crane?
I do, and that's a question that's been raised at the SEC, in fact, of whether and to what extent the institutional investors who blindly follow these proxy firm recommendations or indeed allow votes to be robo-vote without even reviewing what the proxy firms are suggesting, whether and to what extent they're complying with their fiduciary obligations as managing assets on behalf of everyday Americans saving for retirement.
Mr. Griffin, I'd like to turn to you. If proxy advisors are making recommendations to asset managers who vote with other people's money, and these recommendations are politically driven, then is the system actually protecting the interests of the real owners, such as the retirees and savers, or is it really furthering the agenda of these other organizations?
Thank you for the question. I think there is a risk that we prioritize different interests than those of the true investors, those individuals who are working people, teachers, firefighters, saving for their retirement. And those interests may diverge from the intermediaries who hire the proxy advisory firms. So I think that's a real risk.
Has the market share of ISS and Glass Lewis allowed for this shift from protection of real investor interest to what seems to be a more politically driven agenda, Mr. Griffin?
That's certainly possible. I think that the market concentration and market power that they have has created, essentially put them in a quasi-regulatory role in some ways, allowing them to determine things like financial materiality standards, standards for director independence, and effective voting thresholds for board response to shareholder proposals. So,
well, thank you, gentlemen, and Ms. Minow for being here today. I ask a unanimous consent to introduce into the record a document entitled The Conflicted Role of Proxy Advisors from May 2018.
Without objection,
I just watched this congressional hearing footage, and folks, what I'm about to tell you is going to blow your mind. We're talking about foreign companies literally controlling how American businesses operate, and most Americans have absolutely no idea this is happening right under our noses. Here's the bombshell. 70% of publicly traded American companies are controlled by institutional investors, not individual Americans like you and me. But here's where it gets really disturbing. Two companies, ISS and Glass Lewis, control 90% of something called a proxy advisor market. These aren't American companies, patriots. Glass Lewis is owned by two Canadian financial institutions, and ISS is owned by a German corporation. Yet these foreign entities are dictating how $20 trillion worth of American investor assets get voted on. Let me break this down for you in simple terms. When you invest in your 401k or retirement account, you think you're investing in American companies that will work in your best interest, right? Wrong. These foreign-owned proxy advisors are telling the institutional investors how to vote your shares, and they're pushing ideological agendas that have nothing to do with making you money. The testimony we heard makes it crystal clear that these companies have zero fiduciary duty to everyday Americans. Zero. They don't care if their recommendations hurt your retirement savings or cost American jobs. They're pushing climate change policies, DI mandates, and ESG garbage that weakens American companies and makes them less competitive globally. Think about what this means for a second. Teachers, firefighters, police officers, factory workers, all saving for retirement through these institutional investors, and foreign companies are essentially stealing their votes and using them to push left-wing political agendas. This is taxation without representation on steroids. The congressman in this hearing hit the nail on the head when he said this sounds like a racket. That's exactly what it is. These foreign proxy advisors charge nothing for their advisory services because they're making their money on the consulting side. They create a monopoly, then use that power to force American companies to comply with their woke ideology or face negative recommendations that tank stock prices. This is economic warfare, plain and simple. While we're worried about China buying farmland and TikTok collecting data, we got Canadian and German companies controlling how our biggest corporations operate. They're making our companies weaker, less efficient, and less profitable, all while pushing social justice warrior policies that have nothing to do with business success. The most infuriating part is that most Americans have no clue this is happening. Your hard-earned money is being used to vote for policies you probably completely disagree with, and you don't even know it. When American companies are forced to waste money on diversity consultants instead of research and development, when they're hamstrung by climate regulations that send jobs overseas, when they're more focused on virtue signaling than innovation, guess who suffers? American workers and American retirees. This isn't just about corporate governance. This is about national sovereignty. We're allowing foreign entities to shape the priorities of American industry. While China is focused on dominating global manufacturing and technology, we're letting foreign advisors force our companies to worry about pronouns and carbon credits. The witnesses made it clear that the system violates the basic fiduciary duty these firms have to maximize returns for shareholders. Instead of focusing on what makes American companies profitable and competitive, they're imposing their own political beliefs on how corporate America should operate. Here's what really gets me fired up. These proxy advisors have essentially become unelected regulators. They're setting standards for director independence, voting thresholds, and what they consider financially material. They're making quasi-governmental decisions about American companies without any democratic oversight or accountability to the American people. This robo-voting system means that institutional investors aren't even reviewing what they're voting for. They're just blindly following the recommendations of these foreign-owned firms. Your retirement money is being voted according to the political preferences of Canadian and German corporations, not your interests as an American investor. We need to wake up to what's happening here. This is a fundamental threat to American economic independence. We're letting foreign entities dictate the strategic direction of American industry. Every time these advisors push ESG policies that make American companies less competitive, they're essentially economic sabotage. The solution isn't complicated, but it requires political will. We need to break up this duopoly, require these firms to have actual fiduciary duties to American investors, and most importantly, we need to prioritize American ownership and control of American companies. Congress needs to investigate this immediately. We need full transparency about how these foreign-owned firms are influencing American corporate governance. We need to know exactly how much American competitiveness has been damaged by these ideological voting recommendations. Most importantly, we need to give individual American investors more control over their own money. If you're saving for retirement, you should have a say in how your shares are voted, not some foreign corporation pushing climate change hysteria. This is bigger than just corporate governance. This is about whether America will remain economically sovereign or whether we'll continue to let foreign interests shape our industrial policy. Every patriotic American should be demanding answers about how we allowed this to happen and what we would do to fix it. The establishment media won't cover this story because it exposes how the globalist system really works. Foreign money, foreign influence, foreign control over American assets, all wrapped up in nice-sounding language about stakeholder capitalism and sustainable investing. Patriots, this is exactly why we need America First policies in every aspect of our economy. We cannot allow foreign entities to have this kind of control over American industry. Our economic independence is just as important as our military independence, and right now, we're failing on both fronts. If this doesn't wake up every American who cares about our country's future, I don't know what will. We're literally allowing foreign corporations to weaken American companies and steal the votes of American investors. This has to stop, and it has to stop now. That's all for today's video. Patriots, make sure to like and subscribe if you want to keep getting the truth about what's really happening to our country. Share this video with every American you know, because this story needs to get out there. The mainstream media won't tell you about foreign control of American companies, but we will. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and remember, America first always.